Welcome to Napa Valley Inside Out. I'm Latif Hasan, and I am delighted to be hosting this podcast, shining a light on one of the most beautiful and coveted lifestyles in the world. If you're interested in developing a property, planting a vegetable garden, making olive oil, fashion, architecture, interior design, county rules and regulations, biking paths, art, getting into the wine business, farming practices, the tax benefits of owning a vineyard, or the ultimate private tours and tastings, and all the fabulous annual cultural events we enjoy here, and so much more, then you won't want to miss this show. Every week I will be interviewing amazing talent, vintners, entrepreneurs, leaders, consultants, festival organizers, and well-known personalities in the Valley. They will share their knowledge, experience, advice, goals, passions, and their best-kept secrets. Hello everybody, Rob McMillan is the Executive Vice President and founder of Silicon Valley Bank's wine division, based in St. Helena, Napa Valley. He started the division in 1992, and today it is regarded as the leading provider of financial services to the US fine wine business. Rob is the author of the highly acclaimed annual State of the Wine Industry report, and today we are going to be talking about how baby boomers, millennials, cannabis, and much more play into his 2019 forecast for the wine industry. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you
so much for being here.
Yeah, it's great to be here in this beautiful place.
You have been named as one of the top 100 most influential people in the wine business
Go
four
figure.
times.
Go figure.
4 times, and the only banker on the list.
Yeah, that's explainable.
That's very impressive. So what a great privilege to have you. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to our chat. I wanted to give our viewers an overview of your annual wine industry report. I know you also have a video cast that you do with a live audience and a panel, and you have online participants from around the world. Yep. So what can you tell us about your broad-based national and international audience and why your report is so important to them?
Yeah, it's evolved, interestingly, because the report started out almost 20 years ago now as being an email to my customers. And the first time I did it, it was actually I was just trying to gather some information for a board report. And when I put it together, I realized actually it was pretty good data. And so I just repurposed it and sent it out in email. And I had such a response that every year since I've improved on it and got better information and better data, which is really one of the big issues with the U.S. wine business is it's private. And so there's no really good data that's out there. And so a lot of it's word of mouth. And over the 30 years or so I've been in the business now, have collected a bunch of friends from all over the world and we can get together and start to try to put some brackets around the business. And the report now I never thought it was going to turn into this. This wasn't why I was doing the report, but it has gone international now, and I speak internationally. And what's really important for international users is they want to see what the U.S. wine business is about. We have the greatest consuming audience in the world, and so they want a piece of that. And so I get to go offshore and speak occasionally and address some of their questions. So it's a lot of fun for me.
And so we have the largest audience just because because of population, or because we drink more.
Well, we don't drink as much as the Europeans.
Right.
The Europeans have been coming off of the wine consumption that they've had historically now for some time. Ours has been relatively flat, so it's really based on more population than anything else right now, and the numbers of consumers. Roughly 57% of U.S. adult population are alcohol beverage consumers.
Wow, interesting. I thought you made a sobering comment in your report that for the first time since 1993, the the volume of wine sales in grocery stores has declined. Why do you think that is?
Did you use the word sobering on purpose? Well, the reason that we are seeing for the very first time since 1993 a decline in volume sales is related to numerous factors, one of them being an anti-health message that's being promulgated from a number of different angles. It's a rotation of cohorts, so it's the boomer cohort being replaced by the younger cohort. And then cannabis has a small role to play in that. And the last component of it would be that the younger consumers are really beer and spirits consumers today. And then the hope is, of course, that they'll rotate to wine. And that's an open-ended question right now.
Yeah, we're going to get to that in a little bit. Let's talk about millennials and why they're not embracing wine.
Yeah. That was one of the surprises when I started doing the research for the report this last November. I was really surprised to see that the young consumer had really made no move into wine really over the last 5 years. They represent, by my data, roughly 17% of fine wine consumers, perhaps slightly more for the total wine category, but the reports that were out there that were suggesting somewhere around 40% is just factually wrong. It was bad research. So looking further into what those reasons are, there's different values are part of it, and part of it is just their finances. Something that I term the indulgence gap, and the indulgence gap is, in effect, it's an echo of the Great Recession. When the Great Recession hit, we had a lot of young adults that all they had was student debt. And the reaction by the federal government, or the world governments really, were to try to find ways, quantitative easing, whatever you wanted to call it, to reflate asset prices, particularly real estate and stocks. Well, who has the real estate and stocks? Well, it's Gen X and boomers. And sadly, for the young consumer, if you're stuck with a lot of debt, the debt didn't deflate. You still got that debt. You still got to pay it off. So, they come into a point in time post-recession where they had the highest unemployment rates, and they're still stuck with debt. And so what was the reaction? One of the reactions was to go back to school. A lot of them, because they can't find jobs, so well, I'll just go back to school, because guess what? Your student debt is due when you graduate. Unless you go back to school or find a job. If you find a job, you got to start paying. If you go back to school, it's deferred again. So many doubled down.
But you're also borrowing more money to go back to school.
And you're borrowing more money, which is exactly the point, yeah. So it created this lag effect. And so I say there's this indulgence gap where the younger consumers, they need to go through the stage of life that we all went through as older adults, where at a point you buy a house, you buy a car, you get your job, you move up in your career, maybe you start getting bonuses, you have children, you get to that point, you're buying diapers, not fine wine. And so there's that lag, there's that gap. It's just a timing thing at this point, but there's a marketing component to it as well that we'll have to get to at some point.
And you might be assuming that they are going to go through that same process that we all went through, and maybe not. Maybe they're not going to own a car. Maybe they're not going to own a house, and maybe they're not going to have children.
Well, they aren't. Yeah, they aren't now.
They aren't now.
Yeah.
I don't know how many of my clients have said to me, Latif, I really don't think I'm going to get any grandchildren.
Yeah.
And I said, well, hang on a minute. How old are your children? 32, 34. I said, well, give them a little time. But they said, no, really don't think we're going to have.
Yeah.
I think the other part of it too, for those millennials who do have money and can afford to buy whatever they want, the women love the skinny drinks, the vodka and the tequila, and there's also the health messaging that it's negative. So what can you tell us about the health messaging that's out there now?
Yeah, so when we go back to the 80s and the 90s, there was a point in time we called it neo-prohibition, and it was a group of religious political folks that got together to push back on alcohol. For instance, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and we saw things like back in the 90s. We came into the 90s with a 0.14 blood alc limit for drunk driving. Under President Clinton, that actually was dropped to 0.08, 0.14, 0.10, 0.08. Today, it's actually resurfaced as a discussion point, and there's a push now nationwide to reduce it to 0.05. And so it's not just about drunk driving. When you start throwing messaging out like that, it reduces people's thought about drinking at all. You can't go out to a restaurant and have a glass of wine. You start saying, no, I'm not going to do that. And maybe that's good policy. I don't know. But it does have an impact on demand for sure. Beyond that, there are all sorts of science-based research, and I use that loosely because it's, and when you start to look at much of the science that's out there, it's so biased. It's funded, by anti-alc movement. Somebody once said, "Well, show me who funded, or show me the results, and I'll show you who funded the study." So we like to say, well, it's science, it's fact, but a lot of times science isn't fact. And so, as an example, recently there was an article that came out and said something about 1 bottle of wine a week is equal to having 10 cigarettes a week, which is, it's baloney, and I can go into why, but it's not worth it. It's a soundbite that a group of anti-alcohol folks want to throw against the industry. Another Newsweek article that came out last year suggested that that alcohol consumption was worse than the opioid crisis. And so it's a little bit of a return. What we're seeing today is a little bit of return to what we had back in the 80s when they were trying to link alcohol consumption, and wine included, to as a gateway drug to heroin and cocaine. Now you're trying to link it to opioids, right? So the message is it's anti-health. And obviously there's a component of alcohol that is anti-health. But for a young consumer in particular that is incredibly health conscious, they want to know the ingredients, where it came from.
They do.
They want to know how many calories are in it, et cetera. So back to your Skinny Girl brand. It's about calories, and that resonates with the consumer. So, what goes in my mouth? Well, I read this report. I'm not gonna go there.
And I remember a cancer doctor telling me years ago, who had breast cancer herself in the past, that more than 5 glasses of wine a week increased your chances of getting cancer.
Yeah.
That's enough to turn anybody off drinking.
Yep.
If millennials are not buying wine, why would the wine industry as a whole, and particularly family wineries that have smaller production, less marketing budgets, why would they market to millennials?
That's a great question. Yeah, I get that question a lot in my speaking because what I talk about is the need to market to the young consumer, because there's a fact, which is boomers are hitting retirement. The median boomer hits retirement in 4 years now. That's age 66. So you can't stop death, you can't stop taxes, and you can't stop moving along the age thing, and at some point you're in retirement. Boomers, the far edge of the boomer is already over 70. So that's a change. When you're living on a fixed income and retired, you change the way you spend. When you're moving toward retirement, you change the way you think, because you want to make sure you have enough. Right. And so the younger consumer, despite the fact that they're not, it's a little bit of a catch-22 because they're not engaging yet. And then so the question is, why should we market to them? And the answer I give is because they're not engaging, right? Because how do you get somebody that isn't engaged to engage? You market.
Right. And you also said in your report that the wines under $9 are not doing well at all.
Right.
I mean, you can't even find a bottle of wine, I don't think. I mean, can you? Maybe you can.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
pretty hard to. You can? Okay. It's pretty hard to find a bottle of wine for $9 or less.
Well, you're just not looking in the right place.
Yes, obviously. Obviously. Let's talk about baby boomers. So baby boomers, or what about the transfer of wealth before we get there? So we have, tell us about the transfer of wealth and how that will impact millennials and Gen X.
Yeah, the transfer of wealth is a really interesting topic because it's already happening, and it's not happening the way you would think. Saw a recent report that suggested almost 80% of millennials that are in a family unit are getting some level of financial support from parents, cousins, uncles, whatever, and I can see that actually as a parent. It's not only did I help my children with school, but things like phone expenses. You're able to condense your phones instead of having $100 a month. Your phone is $50, and now you got 4 other ones, but now you're paying $200. So that is some wealth transfer. Other things are a little I think funnier, which is I found as an example. I found out the other night I was shut out from Netflix, and it said I had too many users, and so somehow my daughter or somebody had given out my
giving out the password to
somebody else. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, little things,
so yeah. And so it was like, do you want to pay another $1.50? And I said, yeah, okay, fine. And I get another. So we are having this transfer and this support, and I think most boomer parents worry about their kids and their ability to survive. It's rent. It's some of the basics in a lot of cases. So that gets into the needs versus wants again, and so the young consumer's got to focus on those needs. It may not include a car for now. Inevitably, wealth will be transferred. Inevitably, they're going to be older, but guess what? I'm not dying anytime soon, and that ends up being one of the key problems actually in the U.S. with healthcare, an aging population, and Medicare and Social Security that's going to hit a wall here in the not too distant future because we're living longer. So, if my children are expecting me to die anytime soon, and they're not, thank God, but they're not going to get anything. I'm going to spend it all.
That's what everybody says. I see so many of my clients actually talking about the second home that they buy or the primary home when they move here, and they base their budget on being able to also help their children because they don't believe that their children will ever be able to have a deposit or help them with a deposit or something to buy.
And stats show that the young generation, they don't think that they will be able to live the same life as their boomer parents, and I think that's probably true.
You and I have spoken in the past about this, but I did want to say that when I was growing up, I was always working with her. When I was very young, I was babysitting, bingo cards or whatever it might be. But then I always worked 2 jobs, and so did all of my friends and my sisters. It was just normal growing up, and that's how we all got ahead, and that's how I was very fortunate to buy my first home when I was 20 years old, not quite 21, with all my own money. But I really don't see, you were saying that a lot of people do have second jobs. I've been here 20 years living here and been coming here many times a year before that. I don't see that same kind of person working 2 jobs here. I just don't see young people working 2 jobs.
Yeah, if the stats show that they do have a lot of secondary jobs. The government information shows that they do. I think when we're in the Bay Area, we're in a little bit of a warped economic zone. When we see, our tax rates, the amount of money that it takes just to have a house is, and obviously, San Francisco is the most expensive place in the United States to own a home now. So. Part of that supported with Silicon Valley and the technology community that's out there. And so what we see, I think, is maybe a little bit different. It's an incredibly fast pace, but if you move to the vast majority of the rest of the United States, you find a little bit of a different setup, and the job markets aren't, quite as robust in terms of salary.
Right.
And people, if you're hungry, if you're hungry for growth, if you're hungry to develop wealth and to, have something more, then that's the option, is to go find that second job. And people, it's called the side hustle economy.
Yeah. So there's a lot of press about cannabis. Do you think that the legalization of marijuana is affecting wine consumption?
Yeah. So I think I'd have to back up one step and acknowledge one point in the report that I don't think we've talked about yet, which is, or maybe we did, volume sales are down. The part we didn't talk about
in grocery stores is what we said.
In grocery stores, the part we didn't talk about is that that sales in terms of dollars are flattening. So we went through a period of time from '84 to roughly, let's call it 2012, where we had really strong growth rate. Today it's flattening, and as I said earlier, we have an industry that has such little information. And what I hear from my customers and people in the wine industry is, it's cannabis. And so I've ignored it in my report for many, many years because I just didn't think it was. Mm-hmm. So I felt it was time to really address it. So I spent a great deal of time looking into cannabis, and it was equally a difficult topic to address because the data that are out there, it's the same kind of problem that we deal with on the health side. It's very biased. So if you're pro pot, you're going to produce scientific studies that say one thing. If you're anti-pot, then you produce scientific studies that say another thing. The third problem is survey data. So it's socially biased. So just imagine somebody's surveying. You walk out of a dispensary holding a bag, and somebody with a clipboard, and they say, is that for you? Why do you consume that? Did you buy that? How much did it cost? And you say, no, this is for my grandmother.
Of course.
No, this is my lunch.
Yeah.
So you don't get, on the survey, you don't get factual information. So that ends up being a problem too.
Yeah.
I was lucky enough to be able to get hold of what's called scan data, or it's cash register data in legal states. So it's solid data about consumption patterns and age, and what I was able to discover was the average consumer of marijuana today could be characterized as 26 and largely male, which surprised me a little bit because a lot of the other sound bites that are out there saying, well, it's 40. And the average consumer is 40, but not from a use standpoint. It's actually the usage skews to young. Now, wine actually skews to older. 58 is the median point for the most consumption at this point. It's more expensive.
Wine is more expensive than marijuana?
Yeah, it's an expensive product for sure. And it's normally something that we skew heavily toward college educated as well. Looking at the facts on cannabis again, it skews toward 75,000 and below in terms of national income, so it's a little bit less. In non-college graduates is the data that was presented. So when you line up wine use and cannabis use, first of all, they're cross-aged, right? So it's one skews toward the older, the other skews toward younger. But that's also a question about, okay, well, maybe there is a substitution effect because it's the younger side of the wine equation that's not engaging. So maybe that's part of it. And here's why that's a problem. About 57% of the U.S. population of adults are alcoholic beverage consumers. About, call it 60% just to round things off. 13% are cannabis users. So in order for that 13% to affect that 60%, a lot of them would have to either go, when we say legalized, they would go from not smoking or consuming, weed or anything, but consuming alcohol and giving it up and switching. But then when you look into that 13%, what you discover is that 40% of that 13%, that small third, they've been consuming for 10 years already, and illegally. The reality is today, cannabis is not really a substitute for wine. It might be a substitute for less expensive wine, might be a substitute for beer in some occasions. There's different social purposes. So why would, for example, Constellation make a $4 billion investment in Canopy Growth, which is a Canadian marijuana company?
Well, we're going to get to that.
Well, let's do that.
We're going to get to that in the next show.
Oh, okay.
You want to do that now?
No, that's fine.
No, go, and then we will. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So, we're talking cannabis, and they invest $4 billion into Canopy Growth. It's a lot of money.
The largest for those who don't know, it's a Canadian company. It's the largest marijuana producer in the world.
And
right?
Constellation is the second largest wine company in the United States.
Yeah.
Constellation is looking for growth. They're looking for some level of growth against patterns that they've been seeing go like this for a little bit of time. And so, there's a growth opportunity for them. So today, cannabis may not be impacting consumption all that much, maybe slightly on the younger consumer. I think more about tomorrow, because when somebody makes a $4 billion investment, and that's just one example, that's a lot of money. And what does that company do with that money? They market. They start to re-socialize marijuana as being okay. There's still a social stigma against marijuana. Some people lose their jobs, even in legal states. You can't smoke marijuana. You get blood tested. So it still has social stigma. As that starts to change, then I think it can become more of a threat, but less on the THC, which is the inebriating part of marijuana, more on the CBD and the cannabinoid components of marijuana that could go into things like kombucha. So you have a kombucha drink with CBD in it.
I was going to ask you, what are they going to do with it? Are they going to mix it in their drinks?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, right now there's, this is an interesting one to me. There's a tablet that you can use. It's a THC tablet that's dissolved into your beverage. So you can actually take it and put it in alcohol if you want. Today it's illegal.
That's a double whammy, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's a little questionable to me.
Yeah.
It's actually illegal today to put CBD or THC in alcoholic beverages. The laws aren't allowing for that yet. But you can do it in non-alcoholic beverage, and that seems to be one of the transition points that the alcohol beverage industry is making today, which is to take anything that's skewing positive in non-alcoholic and just add industrial alcohol to it. So whether it's kombucha or like LaCroix waters, or LaCroix or LaCroix.
Yeah, I don't know. I know. I can see the spelling.
Yeah, it's with an X. It's let's call it LaCroix for American consumers. And that beverage is just taken off. And what the alcohol beverage industry has done, they just add industrial alcohol to it, and they call it when you look at the back of some of these, it's cold brewed natural sugar cane. Oh. Which it's refined sugar is what it is, but it sounds really cool. Yeah. And then they talk about it as being natural, and when in the marijuana industry, they talk about how much better it is for your liver. How better marijuana is for your liver, and the CB, the benefits, the health benefits of CBD. Even though there's almost no studies that are really out there that prove any of this, but this is the narrative that's out there. This is the narrative that we have to deal with, and going forward, that is the threat, I think, for all, pretty much spirits, beer, and wine. Is there's only so many things that you can drink, and there's only so many times that you want to be impacted by anything. During a week, and so there could be this substitution in time that would be more in the non-alcoholic beverages, but it could back into the alcoholic beverages as well when you start talking about the non-THC components. But that's for the future, but it is a threat, especially when you have that much money out there.
So you're thinking that Constellation's investment in cannabis, in Canopy growth, is to use it in their products, not to have it as not to invest just because it's a great investment. You know, the cannabis industry. You think that there's going to be a blending of alcohol and marijuana.
That's the natural movement. You know, it's anybody in marketing will tell you you're always looking for, you know, the next notch over. If you get a label like Skinny Girl that's just a white wine, well, let's make red wine. If you know red wine works too, well, let's make sugar-free chocolate milk. And Skinny Girl, as an example, that brand is across multiple categories now, and so that's just part of natural branding. And so when you have ownership that is in the wine category, it's an obvious that's going to happen.
Interesting. So we're going to do another show because we've run out of 30 minutes, so we're going to do another one. So we'll be right back.
We have a lot to talk about.
Thank you, everybody. I look forward to seeing you next week when we follow up with Rob McMillan.